Welcome to Waterside Chat, hosted by the Marine Fish Conservation Network. Tom Sadler talks with guests who depend on healthy oceans and fisheries for their recreation and livelihoods. We hear how ocean policy impacts them, their communities, and their coastal ways of life. And now, let's get started.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to today's Waterside Chat. I am delighted to welcome my friend Eric Brazer, who is the Deputy Director of the Gulf of Mexico Reef Shareholders Alliance, and he's also a member of the network's Policy Council. Today, we'll be talking about or chatting about the Shareholder Alliance's quota bank, how good science and data support their policy work, how they support the next generation of conservation-minded commercial fishermen, and their work with the Gulf Wild Brand Program. And Eric, just welcome to the Waterside Chat.
Thank you, Tom. It's a pleasure to be here, talking with you and to the folks online.
Well, great. We'll get right into it. You're right there in the hotbed of fisheries management, how do I want to phrase it? Conundrums would be a good way. Usually those conundrums come out of the Gulf of Mexico Fishery Management Council. They just had a meeting earlier this month. Why don't you catch us up on what the latest is in the Gulf?
Sure thing. And you hit the nail on the head. Appropriate choice of words, conundrums. I wish I had more good news for you, Tom. There's not a lot of good news coming out of the Gulf these days. We've had years of conservation and fishery successes, but we're starting to see signs now that the Gulf of Mexico is telling us it's in trouble. For example, gag grouper, great red grouper, or great grouper stock to catch off the coast of Florida, lowest level on record. And We're looking at an 80% cut in quota just to get this stock back on track.
Wow.
Amberjacks. People love catching amberjacks on the reefs. They are 0 for 3 in meeting their rebuilding targets.
Wow.
And we're looking at about an 80% reduction in quota for that species too. Red snapper, iconic, right? Everybody knows red snapper. It's, the seemingly invincible poster child for sustainable management. They're becoming a little harder to catch in many places.
Wow.
We're seeing the average size decrease. And even the agency's longline survey is starting to show a drop in biomass. So not a lot of great news. And don't even get me started on bycatch and discards in the Gulf of Mexico.
Well, we will get into bycatch and discards at your convenience, my friend. Red grouper, what's the deal? I know you guys were really right in the middle of the red grouper conundrum.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that.
So unfortunately, the Gulf Council decided to reallocate red grouper from the commercial sector to the recreational sector. They did it under the guise of a data calibration. This is coming at a time when the red grouper stock is recovering from some of the lowest levels on record. So you had this action that is actually going to do harm to the red grouper stock. It's going to hurt the commercial fishing industry. Yet the council approved it and the agency implemented it. So we took them to court. Yep. And we lost at the district level, we are now pursuing the appeals process, and we hope that the judges will make the right decision that's in the best interest of the resource, which is also in the best interest of the fishery and the fishery management system. So we hate to litigate, we hate to manage fisheries through litigation, but sometimes we're left with no choice.
Yeah, fisheries management in the courtroom is probably the last place where we want to see it, but sometimes it's the only place you can see it.
Well, it is, and unfortunately, when you look at the Gulf of Mexico Fishery Management Council, you see 17 voting members, and only one of them has any experience in federal commercial fisheries. We have an incredibly lopsided Gulf Council. To put it into perspective, there are more guys named Bob on the Gulf Council than there are true commercial representatives.
Indeed.
Hell, there are more lawyers on the Gulf Council than there are commercial fishermen, and that's not including the NIMS lawyer.
Indeed.
It's really frustrating. We've seen the commercial representation really whittled away and replaced with recreational lobbyists, some scientists that are funded by the CCA. So we're really calling on the Biden administration to step up and support commercial fishermen, the working men and women in the seafood industry, and get this council back on track so we can start to prioritize conservation again.
And what are some of the things that are in front of the council right now that you guys are looking at?
Well, in addition to gag grouper and amberjacks, we are, pushing the Gulf Council to really wrap their brain around ecosystem management. So we're in the process of identifying fishery ecosystem issues, which are a critical component of ecosystem management. The Gulf's lagging behind a little bit when it comes to this kind of thing. Yeah, we've seen the New England Council and the North Pacific Council really kind of take this ball and run with it on the ecosystem front. So we're trying to play catch up in our region. We're trying to get electronic reporting systems implemented in the Gulf. Again, we're behind the 8 ball. Commercial fishermen are still using paper and pencil to report. In this age of technology where you and I and everybody else on this Zoom are communicating from different parts of the country or the world, commercial fishermen still have to fill out a piece of paper and mail it to the government. So,
and is that by their choice, or is that by the way the process is set up?
It's, the agency, right?
For sure.
Once it starts moving, it's hard to get it to come about. So
nice nautical term.
You like that?
Yeah, I did.
But we're making progress, and the agency is working with us to revamp their data systems internally. We've got fishermen lined up ready to test electronic logbooks. But the agency just needs a little bit more time to get their house in order.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right. Well, step back. You and I know each other, but my audience here, the audience here probably doesn't. So tell us the Eric Brazer story. How did you wind up doing what you're doing?
It's not a very exciting story, but it is my story. So I'm happy to share it.
Please.
Starts out in a small coastal village in southern Maine. For those that know. My mother is a school teacher. My father is a commercial lobsterman and bluefin tuna fisherman.
Wow. So
I grew up on the stern of his boat, baiting traps and hauling gear on the weekends. And in the summer, we'd head offshore and harpoon bluefin tuna. Father's one of the few remaining harpooners.
Really?
Yeah, it's really incredible.
I think I want to get your dad on here. I want to get that story.
He's much more interesting than I am.
I don't know, but harpooning blue marlin, that sounds like a pretty interesting story, Eric.
But bluefin tuna.
I think bluefin tuna.
But yes, bluefin tuna. But yeah, he unfortunately he no longer does that, but he's still lobstering. He's 76 years old.
Wow.
Cove in southern Maine. So I, during the summers, I head up there with my 8-year-old daughter so she can learn how to band lobsters without getting bit on ground. So that's where I started from. My father never pressured me to follow in his footsteps. He encouraged me to find my own path. And that led me to get a bachelor's in environmental studies, and then a master's in coastal environmental management. And then I was hired right out of grad school to work on policy and groundfish sector development up in New England with the Cape Cod Commercial Fishermen's Alliance.
Outstanding.
Yeah. So I met some.
Where'd you go to school?
Undergrad at Brown University and graduate school at Duke University.
Awesome. Wow. Wait a minute. Brown and Duke.
Yep.
Very different vibes in those schools.
Yes. I guess I'm a hybrid Brown Bear and Duke Blue Devil.
There you go. Did you like Providence? Did you enjoy being in Providence?
I really did. It was undergoing kind of the start of the Renaissance of rejuvenation if you will. So it was just coming out of being an area that, had a few sketchy spots that you wanted to avoid, and becoming, more of a artsy, cultural, small city. So I loved it. I get back whenever I can.
Well, I asked the question because my grandfather was from Providence and one of those sketchy areas. We were laughing earlier when I was telling Mom's stories. My grandfather was the typical Rhode Islander, very much involved in the fishing industry. He was in the insurance business, and that's what got my love for small boat commercial fishermen, because they were a lot of his clients. But it was like he lived in Newport, and so we didn't go to Providence a lot. We spent, if we were vacationing in Rhode Island, we were vacationing in either Newport or South County. And it wasn't until years and years and years later that I wound up through the good offices of Dave Monty spending some time in Providence. So you were with the Cape Cod folks, and now you're down in the Gulf of Mexico. Little different vibe that way too, right?
A little bit, I had, so after 10 years with Cape Cod, I had the opportunity to run a commercial fishermen's organization in the Gulf of Mexico. At the time, I'd heard about red snapper, but I thought, man, this can't be as controversial as codfish. Let me give this a shot. Yeah.
Famous last words. Famous last words.
But no, it's been great. I started with the Gulf guys in the fall of 2013, so I'm coming up on 10 years. It's been a really great opportunity and experience to work with a really great group of guys, great organization, doing some really good work on the ground.
Awesome. Well, we'll learn more about the good work, but tell us a little bit about the alliance. Give us a backstory, history of the Shareholders Alliance.
Absolutely. So the Gulf of Mexico Reef Fish Shareholders Alliance, long name, they were formed. We started right around 2007, and that was around the development of the red snapper individual fishing quota, or IFQ system in the Gulf. And we've grown it over time to be the largest organization of commercial snapper and grouper fishermen in the Gulf of Mexico. We've got members in all 5 Gulf states, from Brownsville, Texas to the Florida Keys. And our membership is really diverse. We have some of the largest vertically integrated seafood businesses, as well as some of the smallest, artisanal day boat, handline fishermen. We even have a handful of commercial spearfish fishermen.
Really?
So they're, harvesting one fish at a time out of the Gulf of Mexico.
Wow.
But we also have a really great membership base of seafood consumers, environmentalists, and just the general public that wants to support an organization of conservation-minded commercial fishermen. And
tell me a little bit about how the operations. You're the deputy director. Who chairs your organization? Tell me a little bit about your membership, your board.
Sure, absolutely. So I'm the deputy director. We have a policy director, Ashford Rosenberg, who I believe is listening in now. Good to see Ashford. And then we have a part-time admin. So we're really just a staff of 2.5.
Right.
We do have an executive director, a commercial fisherman and fish house owner, but he lets Ashford and I really run the show. We have a 6-person board of directors representing a number of different Gulf states and different types of commercial fishing businesses. And they're very active and involved, but they also give us a lot of freedom and flexibility to steer the ship, if you will.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Who is the executive director?
The executive director is Buddy Gwindon,
Okay.
commercial red snapper fisherman out of the Gulf of Mexico, or out of Galveston.
Galveston.
Owner of Katie's Seafood Market and Katie's Restaurant.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So he carries a pretty heavy weight because he's a fisherman, he's a restaurateur, and a processor.
He does it all.
Or retailer, I guess, is the
retailer. Yeah, and it's a real honest to goodness family business. One of his sons runs the restaurant. The other son manages the fish house. a third son runs one of his boats, and his youngest son is a crew on the boat that his older brother runs. And then the whole thing is named after his wife. So it's a real great family owned and operated business in Galveston.
Oh, that's terrific. That's exactly the kind of thing that I love to see as the epitome of small business, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Doing it all and doing it all with a family. I have nothing against the guys, the hedge fund boys on Wall Street, but I'd much rather see my businesses run by families. So,
yeah, well, this it's a great story to tell, right? It's a story about generations. It's a story about history and tradition, and so much of that exists in our coastal communities that we're trying to hold on to, right?
Right.
While the world changes and the communities change, we're trying to hold on to that culture and tradition. And this is one way to do it, is to get the family involved.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I think that's tremendously important in this day and age, is maintaining those traditions and that heritage of small community involvement.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen what the results are when you get large entities involved, and not necessarily saying that's bad, but you talk about a small community in Maine, right? Or, New Hampshire or Rhode Island. I can think of Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and Point Judith, Rhode Island, and on down through the Cape, and even here in Virginia. I'd love to see that, and I think it's so important that we do what we can to support those small communities. So you gotta forgive me, I get old and my brain stops, it's like, it's crazy. So anyway, so a couple of things I want to talk about that you guys are sort of leading the way with. One is the quota bank.
Yes.
When I was looking at the website, I was fascinated by this. So tell us about what a quota bank is.
Absolutely, I'd love to. It's a really great program. It's something we're really proud of. In some regions, they're called quota banks. In other regions, they're called fishery trusts.
Okay.
But really, they're the same thing, and they are community-based programs that help support and improve commercial fishing access.
Okay.
So it's a really good example of commercial fishermen kind of working within their management system, whether it's a limited access commercial fishery or some sort of IFQ or quota-based program, where they go out and they secure these quotas and these permits, bring them back into their community, and then build a program around it to promote their access. The goal is really to create stronger and more resilient fishing businesses and more stability in our communities on the coast, but to do it in a way that's really kind of bottom up and grassroots, working within the existing management system. So
help me or correct me if I get this screwed up. So there are I'm going to use the easiest terms I can. There are numbers of opportunities for fishermen to take fish, right? And we'll call those opportunities a quota. Yep. And some people have access to the quota, and some people might not have access to the quota, but would want to get access to the quota. And so if there is a bank that they can go to say, here, I need X number, let's say I need X number of pounds of fish from the quota that's available. And a quota is is a management tool, right? It's not a magic wand. It's a management tool that says the system can support removing these many fish from the system. Yep. And that's the number we have to use. And we won't get into the arcane, how do they get to that number? But the number is there, and then somebody, and it's shared. But people who don't have an opportunity through the quota bank to get opportunities to fish. Did I get that close to right?
Yeah, you basically got it, right? So, we'll use the Gulf as an example, right?
Perfect.
It's, an IFQ system, individual fishing quota. When you look at red snapper, the commercial fishing industry catches about 100% of this quota every year. So there's not a lot of extra quota lying around.
Right.
What we saw back in 2015 when we were first toying with this idea, we saw a problem. The problem was that grouper fishermen in Florida were starting to catch more and more red snapper, right? And that's a pleasant problem of rebuilding the red snapper population. There was more of them around, but the quotas weren't increasing at the same rate that the stock was. So there was a limited supply. Grouper fishermen, it wasn't that they couldn't find access to the quota. It's just they may not have known where to go. Maybe they were young fishermen who didn't have a network of business partners. As the organization, we know a lot of those individuals. So we go out, we source that red snapper quota on the open market, brought it into the program, and then built a program around it that said, all right, if you meet these criteria, if you want to reduce discards, if you're a small owner operator, if you agree to do X, Y, and Z, you can apply to the program. And if you get into the program, you get this allocation, you get this quota.
Allocation was the word. Yeah.
Yeah. And you get to make a little bit more money for your business, and you get to reduce your discards and your waste. So it's really a win-win that we're looking for.
So you just don't hold it and say, hey, you pay us X number of dollars and you can have it. You actually set criteria for it. So go back over the criteria because it sounds like you're really putting some focus on the conservation side of this, the maintaining the health of the fishery. Is that fair?
Yes, absolutely. So these criteria were developed by my fisherman board of directors, right? And it's criteria like agreeing not to high grade, right? Keeping all of the fish that you can within the quotas that you have, really doing what you can to reduce discards. We incentivized using video cameras, voluntary video cameras on board. The program requires fishermen to submit their trip reports to us after every trip so we can track this quota, right? So if we lease somebody, if the program leases a fisherman 1,000 pounds of allocation to cover their bycatch and discards, and then all of a sudden we get a trip report saying that they had 1,000-pound red snapper trip and caught nothing else, it's really not the intent of the program, right?
Gotcha.
There's something going on there. So we're setting the bar high. There's a high demand for red snapper. It's a very limited supply. And we're trying to figure out how we get the most bang for our buck, not economic buck, but how we create the most value for the fishery and for conservation through the use of these quotas.
Yeah, and it sounds like you're using a market system to create conservation, which to me, I love that idea.
It's the two sides of the same coin, right? The IFQ system is a market-based system. Fishermen are businessmen and businesses are driven by economics.
Right.
So we thought, how can we marry these two ideas and use a market-based system to help drive conservation?
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the new fishermen, the next generation, and the work that you're doing. It's another area where early on my interaction with you guys was on around the Young Fishermen's Development Act. So talk a little bit about how another success of or another program of the Shareholders Alliance.
Well, you kind of stole my thunder. I was going to leave.
Sorry.
No, but that's fine. We're very proud of the work we did with you guys and the Fishing Communities Coalition and other partners to secure passage of the Young Fishermen's Development Act and really start and create an opportunity for more funding to flow for workforce development. Becoming a commercial fisherman today is a lot different than it was 50 years ago, right? The skill sets are a little different. It's not just about catching fish. It's about how do you build a business? How do you be a businessman or woman who is going to build a business that you could pass on to your kids? So, our hope is that through some of these efforts, we can create foster a crop of young, hardworking men and women that are like chomping at the bit to carry on the legacy from the existing guys. The existing generation sacrificed a lot to rebuild fisheries in the Gulf of Mexico and nationwide. So we want to make sure that this legacy is passed on. We've got our quota bank, which supports next generation fishermen. We're working within the Young Fishermen's Development Act to try and secure some of those funds. We've also developed a Gulf Commercial Fishermen's Program that's focusing on local opportunities in the Gulf of Mexico for training and development.
Tell us a little bit more about that, Eric.
Sure. That's a stakeholder body. We pulled it together over the last few years. It's got young fishermen and old fishermen, big businesses, small businesses, folks from the environmental community, the academic community, and the seafood community. And we really wanted to create a steering committee of sorts that can help us as an organization navigate the opportunities at the local level. There aren't many opportunities for commercial fishing workforce development, which there are not, to help us identify opportunities and start to build out strategies for curriculums, training programs, things like that. So kind of take what's happening at the national level with Young Fishermen's Development Act. Figure out how we operationalize that at the community level.
And you did that with other partners.
Yes. Yep. It's a really robust and diverse stakeholder group. All walks of fishermen and businesses, the seafood community and the environmental community, you name it. We have a really diverse team.
So would it be fair to say that the Shareholders Alliance is a bit of a one-stop shop for someone who wants to get a young fisherman who wants to get in and learn about, okay, what are my opportunities, instead of trying to Google it or go through all the rigmarole on excuse me, my ship's bell reminds me of the time. Go through the rigmarole of doing all the individual research. If they go to the Shareholders Alliance's website, they could find information about that because of this work you guys have done.
Absolutely. We want to be that resource. We know it's hard to work your way into a commercial fishing business this day and age. So whether it's providing you resources, making connections with existing fishermen that maybe you can come together for, build a business plan. Access to capital is a huge thing. So we're trying to figure out, we've got some ideas for how to improve access to capital for young businessmen and women.
Awesome.
Also sharing information and making connections. We want to be there. I want this organization to outlive the existing generation, and I want it to be something that is bigger than just the staff on board. I want the Shareholders Alliance to be here for 50 to 100 years because I think that need is going to be there, and we want to be that resource.
Awesome. And it sounds like the shareholders have created that portal for people to make it easier, because if it's tough, they're going to go look and say, hey, well, you know what, I'm going to be a pickleball coach, or I'm going to build pickleball nets courts. We'd rather keep them, for those of us who enjoy seafood, we'd rather keep them in the business than have them go off to become opera singers or something.
Exactly. There's domestic seafood, especially wild domestic seafood, it's one of the treasures that we have in this country, and commercial fishermen and fishing communities provide access to it, right? It's got health benefits. It has community infrastructure benefits. As we saw in COVID, right? There's food security benefits of having a robust commercial fishing industry. And at the end of the day, we firmly believe that all of this really needs to have conservation at its core, right? You leave a little more fish in the ocean today, you're going to have a little bit more to catch a year from now. And
that's exactly right. And it's the seed corn thing. You don't want to eat up all your seed corn. You need to leave some back, and people need to understand. And you've made two very important points. This is domestic fish that can feed a domestic population without having to go through a lot of the supply chain issues of taking seafood offshore or bringing seafood from offshore onshore. And it supports, the collateral benefits of having a robust seafood community, whether it's ice houses, whether it's gas stations, whether it's places to live, restaurants for people who live locally or who come to visit. I mean, because I grew up in a seafaring town, I understand that, but Newport's a tourist attraction, and it's the people love their seafood, and I think most people would rather get seafood locally than get it from somewhere else, somewhere offshore. Which leads me to another program that you guys are working on, and it's the Gulf Wild brand. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so Gulf Wild is the only program of its kind in the country. There are other seafood traceability programs, but this is really the only one that's conservation-based, that was built by the fishermen themselves for fishermen themselves. So, shameless plug, www.mygulfwild.com. Go check it out and see for yourself. It's a seafood traceability program. The fish are tagged when they come off the boat. These tags have a unique identifier or a QR code, and then you can track these fish from the boat to the fish house, to the processor, to the restaurant, to the fish market.
Fantastic.
It's incredible. It really is. You can learn about the fisherman that caught it, the boat that he or she runs, the bait they use, the gear they use, the story behind the fish house they sell it to. So there's all of that information there to educate the consumers on the fish that they're eating. But there's also this added benefit of knowing that the fisherman that caught this fish and this program itself is trying to raise the bar, right? To create higher standards of accountability, to promote better reporting, better science, better data, cooperative research, video camera use, agreeing to reduce discards, to go above and beyond what federal regulations require. So it's a really fantastic program. It was started around in the wake of the Deepwater Horizon disaster.
Oh, really?
2010, yeah. At that point, consumers were really worried about eating seafood from the Gulf of Mexico, and Gulf seafood consumption dropped precipitously.
Wow.
So the fishermen came together, they built this solution really for the purpose of educating consumers about safe seafood consumption, and to see that the snapper or the grouper that they were eating through this Gulf Wild program weren't being caught in areas that were affected by the oil spill. So they had those assurances. And at the same time, it was an opportunity to promote domestic seafood, to give the consumers some assurances that, hey, this gag grouper was caught off Tampa by an American commercial fisherman, right? It wasn't imported from Mexico to fill a gap.
Right.
So multiple benefits, really great program. Can't speak highly enough of it, and would love to see more programs like that develop.
Well, we'll put that, and I'll let you give the plug again, but we'll put it in the show notes for folks so they can get it. But give me the URL again.
Yep, it's www.mygulfwild.com.
Awesome. Well, I can tell you, in the Sadler household, we have a binder of seafood restaurants, and on the binder it says, "Friends don't let friends eat imported shrimp." So we're very domestically food oriented here, and we see this in the Shenandoah Valley. Obviously, not a coastal community, but we want to see locally produced foods, and we want to eat locally produced foods, and there's a certain level of comfort to that. Eric, from what you've been saying, we're going to continue on, but I want to stop for a moment and sort of praise the Alliance. It really sounds like the work you're doing, the programs that the Alliance has put together, has really been focused on creating regimes, creating programs, and public awareness of things that create conservation, meaning sustainable seafood. Is that a fair assessment of sort of the larger mission profile of the Alliance?
Absolutely. It is at the heart of who we are. It is at the heart of what we do. Without conservation, you won't have a commercial fishing industry. You won't have a seafood industry. You won't have domestic seafood consumption. I mean, we talk about it, in our vision statement and our mission statement. That's how important it is to us that conservation and stewardship protect fish populations, and in doing so, protect fishermen, commercial fishing businesses.
No, go ahead, finish up. I'm sorry.
No, that was it. Yeah.
Okay, so you're approaching more than 20 years in with two organizations. From your perspective, from your vantage point, have you seen an increase in appreciation for that conservation view, or are you still really fighting against the tide here?
No, the evidence is in the proof, right? For the lack of a better phrase.
Right.
In the beginning, it was tough, right? For my predecessors to sell commercial fishermen on the idea of conservation. But, during the development of the IFQ systems in the Gulf of Mexico, the implementation of the IFQ systems, commercial fishermen really they experienced the benefit of conservation, of, taking a fishery, cutting the quotas way back, but restructuring them in a way that makes it more efficient and more profitable, while setting those quotas at the level they should to protect the fish, but preventing overfishing. Right. And when commercial fishermen saw that, wow, we can make more money and fish more sustainably, absolutely, let's do this. And that was the spark that ignited it. We're always advocating for conservation. We align very well with a lot of the goals and objectives of the environmental community, and we're not afraid to say that.
Right.
We work very closely with a number of charter for hire fishing businesses in the Gulf of Mexico that have, seen that spark. They've experienced that benefit as well. So we are basically in lockstep with most of the charter for hire fleet in the Gulf of Mexico.
Gotcha.
We'll come to council meetings. For example, as many times as we have come to council meetings and advocated for quota increases, we have come to council meetings to oppose quota increases. Because more often than not, unfortunately, we see a lot of these proposed quota increases coming at a time when the stocks are going down.
Right.
There's a lag in the data and a lag in the management. So we are adamant. We'll get up to the microphone and say, look, I would benefit from you increasing my quota by 20%, but I'll tell you what that's going to do. That's going to crash this stock, and I'm going to be out of business in 10 years. So do not raise quotas at this time because the fish stocks cannot handle it. We say that more than we say the opposite.
So it sounds like in the 20 years, you've seen quite a transition from the let me take it now while I can, as opposed to currently, look, we need to manage for the long term as opposed to the short term. Is that fair?
It is fair. And it's great to have, it's not just us, but it's great to have a team of partners that think the same way, including the network, Fishing Communities Coalition, Seafood Harvesters of America, but also the industry groups themselves. Alaska Longline Fishermen's Association is a great example, another network member. Maine Coast Fishermen, Cape Cod Fishermen, a number of folks on the West Coast. So there's a growing community of businesses and organizations that see the value, the economic value and the community value of promoting conservation.
That obviously thrills me as I get older in my life. I like to hope to see that things are changing from where I was when I was 24 years old. I want to jump back really quickly for a second back to the next generation question. And one of the things I forgot to ask and want to ask, because I think it's important for people who are going to be listening to this or watching this, intern programs. Are there intern programs in the industry beyond what I assume you guys have one? I should say I know that, but I just don't want to say I did and not be wrong. So are there intern programs in the industry?
There are. There's a number of them. We are going through the intern process, application and hiring process right now, actually.
For 2023.
For 2023. So, and I know there are other organizations, similar organizations that are doing the same thing. Internships are really important to us because it's an opportunity to take really smart, highly motivated, energetic students, right? Undergraduates, graduates, recent grads, drop them into the real world settings that they've read about in their textbooks and give them, a dose of what actually, how the sausage gets made.
Right.
And you see their eyes light up. And it's a really great experience because a lot of these folks will end up being colleagues of mine, right? I've interned with a number of folks in my past that, are still friends, but they're colleagues.
Right.
And they work in this industry, they work for the agency, they work in the environmental community. So the more younger folks that we can bring on board in this arena now, I think the better off we're going to be as an industry, as a community, a larger community down the road.
Well, that's great. I didn't want to, I was pretty confident that there were intern programs in play. And I think, as you said, that is one of the great entry points for someone who's not sure and gives them a chance to spend some time on the transom or on the deck plates and understand what it really is, plus learn the science and management behind fisheries, or the science and management for good fisheries management. Which brings me back to sort of the work that you all do. You mentioned one example about how your policy work, your advocacy shapes commercial fishing regulations. Are there other ones that you want to talk about?
I mean, we're always either fighting for something or fighting against something.
Right.
And, there are examples where we've come together and been able to get the council to successfully, support or oppose measures that are important to us and our fishermen and the resource. But I think the biggest take home here that I have is the process by which we do that. We're an organization without a brick and mortar office.
Right.
Myself and my staff work remotely. Our fishermen are spread out throughout the Gulf of Mexico. So we take every opportunity at a Gulf Council meeting, fly in, come together, and have our strategy sessions, right, to build out our policies when we're on the ground. So at every Gulf Council meeting, we have 10 to 20 fishermen there in the audience, giving testimony, meeting with council members for breakfast or beers, meeting with agency staff, advocating, analyzing, and developing proposals. So we're right there in the face of the council. And by doing that, we've made some enemies, right?
Of course.
But I think we've built up a lot of respect with the council members and with the agency itself, showing that, hey, we're committed, we're willing to drop everything for a week at a time to come to wherever you're meeting and sit down with you and explain to you why this is important to us, right? And to do it not just with the older existing generation of fishermen, but to show them the new faces, the next generation that are going to be there as well. So getting fishermen involved, getting them active, building respect, building networks, that's the key to success. Like, you have to be active and involved if you want to affect positive change. And frankly, whining on Facebook doesn't count. And we know there's sure a lot of that in the fish world.
Oh, man. That's a great point, Eric. It says somebody was asking me about that the other day. And I said, there are a lot of fishermen on Facebook, but I don't see as many of them on the streams, right? And I certainly don't see as many of them out cleaning up the streams. And so I think you make a really important point that it's all well and good to talk the game, but you have to actually go out and participate at the council level. And I'm going to guess that the council has become familiar enough with the organization's mission and worldview that they see you guys coming in as a way of supporting long-term management as opposed to short-term. Is that fair?
That is fair. I mean, I hope that they see that, and they see that we're really trying to, use our powers for good, right?
Yeah.
And showing that, hey, look, we want these fisheries to be here. We want these fishermen to be here long beyond when most of these council members are still sitting at that table.
Awesome. Well, it's as you said, you guys show up, and it's good to see that you do show up. So I'm going to be cognizant of the time, but also I do. Bob asked a question, which I'll throw out here for you. And I think it's a great question, Bob. So thanks for asking. What significant changes in the next 5 years do you see organizationally in Gulf fisheries?
Oh, that's a great question, Bob. Thank you for it.
Not an easy one to answer, though, right?
No, I wish you'd given me a heads up.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. No, it is a great question. It's something we think about constantly. From an organization's perspective, over the next 5 years, we hope that we can grow some capacity from a staffing perspective to become a little bit more stable when it comes to funding and fundraising and how we access the funds to do what we do. From a Gulf fisheries perspective, unfortunately, I think things are going to get worse before they get better. And I think the council is going to have some tough decisions ahead of it in terms of doing what it needs to do to promote conservation, to get some of these fish stocks back on track, but also to address the elephant in the room, which is the discards from the recreational sector, the unlimited, open access, highly uncertain recreational sector. We could plug every other hole in the Gulf of Mexico, but if we leave that one open, I think the boat's still going to sink.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's fair. Everybody needs to participate at an equal level in the conservation and sustainability side. So, forewarned is forearmed, right? Yep. We know how fast things change, and I think trying to make predictions on anything 5 years in advance is difficult. But I'm heartened, at least, and I hope our listeners are, and viewers are, that there are organizations, industry organizations, who are taking that view of let's make it sustainable. Let's be conservation oriented, not for us, but for the next generations on infinitum, right? We're not doing this for next year or even next generation. We're doing it for the long future of people who benefit from having seafood on their plate or as a business. I'm going to pivot on that real quick to say, there is another elephant in the room, and that's global climate change. It is not one of those questions that you can answer. It's just sort of an opportunity for you to share with us sort of where the Shareholders Alliance is looking at, what they're dealing with, how you guys are approaching that question.
That is an elephant in the room. And I think, in my opinion, climate change, climate impacts, maybe not as cut and dry or as clear in the Gulf of Mexico than in other regions.
Sure.
Right. We are seeing some stocks shift. Big yellowtail are moving up the coast and showing up in mid-coast Florida. We're experiencing the data is showing that we're seeing some warming sea surface temperatures, increases in ocean acidification. Certainly, nutrient runoff is triggering massive red tide. We've got the dead zone to worry about in the northern Gulf. We have, more and stronger hurricanes, as everybody's familiar with. So we have all of these factors that are coming together to impact the Gulf of Mexico, not just the ecology, but the coastline and the communities. But frankly, it's really hard to tease out, the impacts of these environmental factors versus the impacts of and I'm not trying to pick on the recreational sector.
No, I get it.
But it's the impacts of having an open access, unlimited, highly uncertain fishery sector.
Mm-hmm.
And in the case of the Gulf of Mexico, that's the recreational sector. We're seeing localized depletion. Maybe some of that is due to global warming. Maybe some of it is due to the fact that there's 50 times as many boats pounding the same spots as there were 5 years ago. So I think it comes down to building out an ecosystem strategy, making sure we have the data systems in place to collect the right science, but also doing everything we can to control the factors that we can influence, right? We can't stop global climate change, but what we can do is make sure that our fisheries are resilient and their management uncertainty is decreased, and we have a really good idea of how many fishermen there are and how many fish they're catching and killing. And that's on the commercial side, the charter side, and the private angler side.
Sure. Well, as I said, I'm cognizant of the time, so I'm going to wrap us up with a big thank you. It's been educational. We will put information in the show notes. I really appreciate you taking the time to share all this with us. I hope I can get you and maybe even your dad back for a Waterside Chat.
Absolutely, especially if we do it on the water.
There you go.
Lobster boat in Maine, or we'll get you.
I hope Colin and Rob are listening. In my budget, if I could get a big boost in my budget, we could do a on the boat Waterside Chat sometime. So, Eric, thank you so very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Tom. It's always a pleasure. Colin, Joe, Rob, all of you guys, this has been great. And thank you to those of you who joined in on the webinar as well.
Awesome. Well, that's it for now. Our next Waterside Chat is in the works. The information will be out by email or in our social media channels. And until then, thanks for joining us.